Well, hello, and welcome to the Sprinklr Coffee Club. Cheers. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm your host, Marshall Kirkpatrick, and I am excited to drink some coffee and have some conversation with my friend, JT Ramsay. JT, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. I'm enjoying some tea here, but the sentiment's the same. Pleasure to be on with you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for joining us. So JT is a veteran social and digital marketing leader. JT has done some really groundbreaking work at Comcast, at Ford, and with some other large enterprises as well. A lot of times we have guests here on the Coffee Club who are professional speakers or authors, and they have to hustle too in order to do the production work in this era of user-generated content and self-publishing. But we know there are many people out there in the audience who are working for companies. And if you're watching Sprinklr Coffee Club, you're probably a change agent. You're probably someone who is a part of an organization and you're excited about new media, digital technology, and you want to figure out how you can implement it as successfully as possible, or at least increase your odds of success in any given experiment. And we have a special treat for you today in this conversation with JT. So I hope that you will stay with us and ask some questions. Go ahead and jump into chat there and ask questions. We'll bring those into the conversation. And we've got some specific things that we want to talk about today, but we welcome your input and hope that it proves really valuable to you and your career. And I'm sure it'll be a fun conversation. So, JT, we've known each other for a long time now, haven't we?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about it. It may be nearly a decade now, Marshall.
Fantastic. Oh, and I'm so glad that you're a guest with us here today. I want to ask you from a practitioner / leader's perspective to tell us some stories from the front lines of things that have gone well, things that have not gone so well, so that we can all learn from your experience. But maybe you can start with some good news. Have you got a favorite story or two about, before that, maybe you can set the stage a little bit for this story and tell us about something that you're proud of that's worked really well, that we can all draw some inspiration from.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that what makes my story unique is that, I've been in this space for nearly as long as it's existed. And, what that's provided is really a unique opportunity where today you have a tremendous amount of specialization in digital and social media, whether that's in communications or marketing. And, I was fortunate coming on board at Comcast in 2010, like almost this, I think it was, 2010 this week, to be able to, build from the ground up, starting out from a really great corporate blog and then building out a digital social practice around it. And, over time, I got to play with a lot of interesting technologies. And, one of my favorite stories is one that involves you, Marshall. And I know that's a little embarrassing, but, really working with you before you joined Sprinklr and, the influencer identification tool you developed. Oh, that's my dog joining the call. The influencer identification tool you developed, Little Bird, was really transformative for me and for the organization I worked with. When you're working in a large enterprise that's jumping into a lot of new categories, I think it can be a bit overwhelming to figure out who you ought to be talking to and how. And that's not only for people that sit in the seats I have, where you're leading digital and social at one of these organizations. It's also to help your colleagues who are offline, who are responsible for chips. And so that to me was a really powerful tool to help get my arms around the nascent influencer marketing and engagement space.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's That's really heartwarming, JT. And I appreciate your kind words there. What did that look like? How did you do it?
Well, I mean, worked very closely with you, which was fantastic because I just had a lot of questions. I knew that the consumer tools I had been using to, the goals that I'd set, and then really quickly and figure out, for instance, who is influential in conversations around Internet of Things or the smart home. And so I was able to really draw on a lot of my social listening experience and kind of plug that into the tool you had developed with your team, and start to sort through who's out there that's influential online and off to develop relationships with. And so it was me learning the tool first, and then it was evangelizing within the organization to help the broader team understand, okay, like if you want to talk to somebody that knows something about the future of health and wellness, well, here's how we're going to find those people so that it's a better shortcut than kind of just poking through Google results.
That's fantastic. And do you so that's the Little Bird product that we built. That's now a part of the Sprinklr suite. It's been 3 years this month since we came over into the Sprinklr family, and it's just one of many different things that you can do with the Sprinklr technology, of course. But so I have lots of questions. How did you know when you were evangelizing a new technology inside of this big organization? How did you know who to evangelize it to, and what did you do to be successful in that?
Yeah, I mean, education, I think, is for anybody that works in digital social. I think that that education component is constant, and you're always trying to figure out new ways to do things because the platforms we're playing with are always evolving. And one of the things that I think is very important for anybody in this space is to make sure that never assume anybody else knows what you know, because it is so complex. And I think that being able to get in front of not just the your reporting chain, but in front of executives who might be outside of your function, I think that that's really critical to get the kind of buy-in you need to prove out a new technology. So to me, I think if you're in a culture where you're able to have those conversations pretty easily, and you've built relationships over time, I think that that's the most valuable way to get technology in front of people who are going to be able to benefit from using it.
So building relationships horizontally among leaders in different parts of the organization first, and then bringing technology that you've got a solid understanding of personally to them to expose them to the opportunity.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think that the credibility piece has nothing to do with what your role in the organization is. You have to build that credibility, and then be a trusted advisor that can get in front of a bunch of different audiences within any organization. And I think that that's really the critical piece. But then the other side of it is really understanding the technology that you want to bring on board. And I think that that's where working with you on this was so easy, because I wasn't talking to somebody who didn't really know the product. I think that that's one of the challenges in a lot of these these relationships is sometimes your main point of contact isn't in part of the technology function that can help you understand it. They maybe work in sales, and that's an important role, and that's an important point of contact. But if you've got questions about a given platform, being able to go to someone who can not only answer your questions, but also maybe change the product roadmap to meet your needs, I think that's really important. So for me, it was really learning Little Bird and seeing its potential, and then also, helping edit down the results. I mean, I think that was one of the things that was so powerful about Little Bird was that, you could get thousands of results, but for a lot of organizations, you can't scale your communications or your marketing that way, especially, if you want to have, a one-to-one relationship with that person. And so, for me, it was not only, playing with the technology, it was also editing down the results so they were more bite-sized and actionable.
That's great. I've seen you around the social web. You do a really good job of interfacing one-to-one with thought leaders in various industries. That's something that I imagine a bunch of our viewers would love to hear about. If you're watching the show live today, feel free to jump in with questions of your own in the live chat question area there in YouTube. But JT, can you tell us a little bit about your experience of building those relationships with influencers in the markets that you were researching?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where there's no single answer for how best to approach this. I think that more than anything, kind of being opportunistic, looking for times where someone who's influential, who you want to develop a relationship with, mentions the brand you're working for. That's a great opportunity to reach out from your personal handle on whichever platform, but typically Twitter. Reach out and engage that person in a friendly way, and also give yourself time. I think that one of the big challenges in influencer marketing today, and a lot of the backlash against it, is that it's so transactional. And I think that especially from a communications perspective, where you're accustomed to reaching out and playing in the earned media space, it's something where it's a slow burn. And so for me, I think being able to reach out to people who are mentioning the brand and then figuring out ways to help them, whether it was that they needed more help on a story they were pursuing, they wanted to talk to an executive, they were having an issue with a product or service, those are all really great opportunities to jump in and develop that one-to-one. I think that one of the key pieces to this that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, this started in 2008, 2010. Social was just a really different landscape. And so I think that that's a piece of it too, is that, many of these relationships were built, when the platforms were different, when it was easier to engage with very influential people, when there were fewer people on the platform. I think that, all of that factors in as well.
Interesting. How long do you feel like it took to typically build a relationship with an influencer that you sought to connect with in that kind of organic, earned way?
I mean, I think it again, it varied. I think that there were people who had, media, for instance, have, really clear asks. And so, you can answer those pretty quickly and concisely. I think that, with people who aren't attached to a media outlet, it can be a bit more challenging because you need to explain the why you want to have that relationship. If that's, something about, oh, this person's an influencer in the customer experience space, and you really want to develop that relationship, you need to be able to give them the why, and have it not be a directly transactional exchange. So yeah, I think that, at that time, it was, Twitter was a much simpler platform, and it was one where it was frankly easy, once you've identified the people you wanted to talk to just jump into their mentions and introduce yourself. And then, and if there was no engagement, move on. There are other people to talk to. But I think that being able to be on the platform in that early window was really instrumental, because in the interim, right, influencer marketing and engagement has become a multi-million, if not billion-dollar industry, and the landscape's changed, the expectations have changed. And so I think that there are still lots of good earned opportunities, but I think it's a much more challenging environment than it was when it all kicked off with Little Bird.
Yeah. Well, before we move over onto a focus on challenges, I wonder, is there an example that comes to mind of someone that you connected with really well in the influencer space that you really liked, that you had a non-transactional relationship with, even though you were doing that work in your day job with a brand?
Yeah, and I mean, it's actually a pretty recent example. I was able to work with Sean Duras, who at the time was a Snapchat specialist, and we had been going back and forth talking about opportunities to work together. And as it happened, he was in Dubai for a conference with some friends, and we were able to get him into a vehicle and an experience, and that was tremendous. And it wasn't something that we paid for. It was just an experience that we created with them, and they were able to create really great content. And that was fantastic. I mean, and that's rare now, but I think that that's one where thinking creatively about how you engage influencers. I think that's really important. I think that when you're thinking about influencer targets that you want to engage with as a brand, you need to make sure that you're matching whatever experience, if there is going to be at some point a transaction, you need to really map out, okay, this person has a massive audience. We have to make a very special experience for that person. And that, I think, is the critical piece. You can't just, spam information out to them, over email and expect anything good to come out of it. You've really got to create, the kind of experience that you yourself would find appealing, and that's gonna have the best return on investment.
Mm-hmm. So I've seen you publicly engage with folks like that, and then I presume get them following you back because of a non-transactional engagement, and then have a private conversation. Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's pretty typical, I think. And like I said, I mean, that can take a lot of time, because you have to build that trust and that credibility, and then you also have to demonstrate that you're going to create something that they're going to want to participate in and share. And so, it's also doesn't all happen at once, right? Like, you have to invite them to something, you have to have that face-to-face conversation, and then you have to, brainstorm together what would be a cool thing. Like, what would you like to do with us? And maybe we can figure that out. And I think that you're right. Like, it's like, hey, I've got an idea for you. And that's where it starts. And then, you slide into the DMs and see where it goes from there. Understanding that it might not work out. And that's okay too. That's where you've got to, always be looking for new people to work with.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It reminds me of perhaps an even more Hail Mary approach that James Altucher talks about, where from even pre-social web, he says that he would, for every 20 letters that he would send to people with a business idea, 6 of them would respond, 4 would want to talk to him, and 1 or 2 would end up doing business with him. I thought that was funny.
Yeah, so I think that's exactly it. And you have to have that kind of expectation and mindset coming in.
So speaking of a high tolerance for experimentation, let's move on to other technologies and the flip side of things. Can you tell us a little bit about some lessons learned or things that you have done in implementing new social digital technologies at big companies that you would do differently?
Yeah, no, I think, one that springs to mind that I've got I've got both positive and negative experiences with is really in the employee advocacy space. I think that employee advocacy at its dawn was something that I got into as we were looking for more ways to amplify content organically. And I think that there's a lot of value when you're looking at everybody in the brand social toolkit. You're kind of looking at your internal comms as part of your toolkit, as well as the other external own channels you have. So one of the things in the early going was playing with these at the time very new employee advocacy tools. Was okay figuring out like who's like what is our content and what is the audience for that content, and then who within the organization can help us get that out in front of their networks, and then what impact will that have. And I think that from a standpoint of trying, if anybody in the audience has worked in the executive C-suite social space, time is really of the essence. And you can't place an inordinate burden on an executive to be promoting content. There are outliers in that space where you do have executives who are very social savvy, very active in the space, but more often than not, they work with just a handful of platforms, and they do it infrequently. And so I think with employee advocacy, being able to find a tool that tapped into this impulse where, okay, I know I will share news about the company, for instance, but they maybe don't know how, or it's too time consuming to look for it. Employee advocacy tools were great. It provided a dashboard essentially where that executive could browse and see which stories they felt best sharing that would be authentic to them and their function in the organization, and they could push those out on Twitter or LinkedIn. And there's a lot of value there. Getting your executives engaged really from the director level up can be a really powerful tool to help create a better picture of what your organization is about on social media. I think that where you run into challenges is when you try to blow that out at scale. And I know that there are some really great examples of companies that have done this. Dell immediately comes to mind as an early adopter in the employee advocacy space. But I think that that's something that's really core to that culture. And they didn't just invest in the employee advocacy tools. They invested in training for that at scale as well. And so I think that when you're invested in that way, you can see the success stories jump out, because as a company, that was part of their reputation. I think that one of the things that's a challenge within employee advocacy are the incentives, right? The incentives for most employees just aren't the same as they are for executives who are have a different profile and are really within that nervous center of the organization. For me, I felt like employee advocacy tools were most useful because I still believe that employees want to share good stories about, what the company they're working for is doing. I think that very few employees really know, which stories have been carefully planned and, given to media versus those that have been maybe were leaked. So I think that there's some guardrails there, and you can begin to build that culture and training. But at the end of the day, most employees aren't being measured, even if you gamify employee advocacy, they're not being measured by the impact they're having. They're measured by whatever it is that they're working on and what their leadership wants them to accomplish. So I think that that's one of the real challenges within the employee advocacy space that I think varies from culture to culture.
Do you think that that's changing though, JT? Do you see a future where the workplace has changed and everyone does understand social technology and social networks to be an important part of their job?
Maybe. I think think about email, right? I think that there are still probably executives who aren't totally comfortable with email. And I know that sounds absurd, but that's just a reality. Somebody handles their calendar and handles their inbox, and that's really all it is. And from a standpoint again of how much time do I want to invest in this, and then also what do I have to gain? I think some people maybe are really good at personal branding, and that's fantastic, and it can absolutely be an asset for them. But I think that it's again it varies culture to culture. I can think of plenty of organizations where I don't know if it would help if everybody in the organization was on social. Not only because of the time invested, but because what is the ROI of that for a small or a medium business, for instance. So yeah, I think that there's still work to be done there, and I don't know that if it can all be attributed to when we're in the future, this will all make sense. So I think but there's still thought and strategy that needs to go into it.
Agreed. Well, I do think that my vision of the future includes a whole lot of social listening and social engagement from the top to the bottom of the organization. But that may be aspirational. I think we're working that way. Speaking of aspirational futures, let's wrap up with this, JT. What do you foresee in, say, the near to midterm future? What's your ideal state of what kinds of things do you want to be working on? What kind of practice are you looking to build in the future?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think that one of the things for anybody that works in social media or digital communications or marketing, I think that you're already beginning to see a bit of a paradigm shift. It being a push notification approach to what kind of experiences are we creating collectively. And so to me, I think it's really important to, not be in a siloed social practice where you're trying to reconcile whatever it is you're hoping to accomplish with other goals within the organization. I think having someone think about, what social should be doing for an organization, in a holistic sense, from communications to care, is really critical. And so that to me, having somebody think about all those consumer touch points, how life, wherever a consumer might find it, that's something that I think is where this space should head.
Yeah, fantastic. I like that a lot. Well, this has been a lot of fun to talk about, JT. Where can people learn more about you and your work online?
I am on Twitter. It's at JT Ramsay, Ramsay, and I'm on LinkedIn too. Hit me up. Would love to talk offline. This has been a fantastic conversation, Marshall.
I think so too. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all the conversations we've had online over the years. I really enjoyed a sneak peek behind the curtain at how you've been doing the kinds of work that so many of us aspire to do, to be and are in the midst of doing, of implementing these kind of technologies in big companies. So I feel smarter as a result of getting to hear about your experience. And I appreciate that. Folks, thank you so much for your time today, joining us here at the Sprinklr Coffee Club. Feel free to jump online and engage with JT and I, and we will see you in next week's episode. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.